kicked out and left to fend for myself, I faced the harsh reality of homelessness. This is my journey of redemption through struggle, self-discovery, and rebuilding broken family ties.
The first time I truly understood the meaning of cold wasn't when winter winds bit through my threadbare coat or when my fingers went numb fumbling for a discarded cigarette. It was the chill that settled deep in my bones the moment my mother's words, sharp and final, sliced through the air. "Get out. You're no longer welcome here." I remember standing on the porch I'd sat on countless summer evenings, the porch where my father used to teach me how to tie fishing knots. But now it was just a threshold I was being pushed across. The door, heavy oak, slammed shut behind me with a sound that echoed not in my ears, but in my chest, a physical punch that stole my breath. It wasn't just a door closing, it was my world collapsing. I stood there, a cheap duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the weight of it nothing compared to the crushing burden of my family's rejection. The streetlights cast long, indifferent shadows. My breath plumed in the frigid night air, but my vision was blurred by unshed tears. The house, once a beacon of warmth and safety, now loomed like a fortress I was forever locked out of. That night, under a sky full of stars I couldn't appreciate, I learned what it felt like to be truly alone. There was no plan, no destination, just the gnawing emptiness in my stomach and the searing pain in my heart. Every step I took away from that house was a step into the unknown, a journey into a darkness I never imagined I'd face. This isn't just a story about surviving homelessness. It's about the kind of gut-wrenching betrayal that strips you bare, leaving you to question everything you ever thought was true about love, family, and yourself. It's about finding hope in the rubble of rejection and rediscovering who you are when everyone you trusted has turned their back. It's my story of redemption, forged in the fires of unforgiving streets and the quiet strength I found buried deep within. And it all began the night I was kicked out, left to fend for myself, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a broken heart. I grew up in a small town, a place where everyone knew everyone and family names carried weight. Our house, a 2-story colonial with a sprawling front yard, was always the picture of suburban contentment. My father, a stoic but loving man, worked hard as an engineer. My mother, beautiful and meticulous, prided herself on maintaining appearances. A perfect home, perfect children, perfect life. On the surface, we were the ideal family. We went to church every Sunday, had family dinners every night, and summer vacations to the lake were a sacred tradition. But beneath that polished veneer, there were cracks, deep, unspoken fissures that ran through the foundation of our relationships. My older sister, Sarah, was the golden child, accomplished, graceful, always making the right choices. I, on the other hand, was the dreamer, the one who asked too many questions, who felt too deeply, who sometimes struggled to fit into the neat boxes my parents had drawn for us. I wasn't rebellious in the typical sense. I simply saw the world differently. I loved art, music, writing, pursuits my father deemed impractical, my mother tolerated with a strained smile. "You need to think about your future, dear," she'd say, her voice laced with an anxiety I didn't fully understand then. A proper career, something stable. I remember countless conversations where my ideas were gently but firmly steered back to what was sensible. I always felt a quiet pressure to conform, to be less of me and more of what they expected. This wasn't outright cruelty. It was a slow, subtle erosion of my spirit, a constant message that my true self wasn't quite good enough. There were moments of tenderness, of course. My father teaching me how to change a tire, his big hands guiding mine. My mother baking my favorite apple pie, the scent filling the kitchen with a temporary warmth that felt like love. But even in those moments, there was an undercurrent of conditionality. Their affection often felt tied to my adherence to their unspoken rules, their expectations. As I entered my late teens, the gap between who I was and who they wanted me to be widened. I started questioning things, expressing opinions that differed from theirs, and seeking connections outside the family circle that felt more authentic. This was met with growing disapproval. My mother's disappointed looks became more frequent, my father's lectures more pointed. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, constantly aware of their scrutinizing gaze, their silent judgments. I craved their approval, their unconditional love, but it felt like a prize I could never quite win. The emotional distance grew, slowly at first, like a creeping fog, until it became a wall between us. I remember one evening, I tried to share a poem I'd written, something deeply personal. My mother listened politely, then suggested I focus on my college applications instead. My father just grunted and turned back to the evening news. In that moment, I felt a familiar ache, the pain of being unseen, unheard, and fundamentally misunderstood. I didn't know then that these subtle rejections were preparing me for the ultimate, devastating blow that was yet to come. The tension in our home had been building for years, a slowly tightening knot in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a series of quiet detonations that chipped away at my sense of belonging. The straw that broke the camel's back, as they say, wasn't a single event, but a culmination of my independent choices clashing head-on with my parents' rigid expectations. It began subtly. After high school, unlike Sarah, who went to a prestigious university, I wanted to take a gap year. I wanted to travel, to experience life, to find my own path before committing to a degree I wasn't sure I wanted. This was met with outright horror. My mother, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger, declared it a waste of potential, a reckless disregard for your future. My father, usually quiet, unleashed a torrent of disappointment, comparing me unfavorably to Sarah. "She knows what she wants," he'd said, his words like daggers. "She has ambition." I eventually conceded, enrolling in a local community college, but my heart wasn't in it. I spent my evenings volunteering at a local homeless shelter, an experience that opened my eyes to a different kind of struggle, a different kind of humanity. I found a sense of purpose there, a genuine connection with people who saw me for who I was, not for what I was supposed to be. But my parents saw it as a distraction, a waste of time. They'd often make disparaging remarks. "Why are you spending your time with those people?" Their tone implied I was debasing myself, associating with the unworthy. The rift widened further when I started dating Mark. Mark was everything my parents disapproved of. He was artistic, had tattoos, worked part-time at a coffee shop, and lived life on his own terms. He didn't come from money, didn't have a plan in the traditional sense, but he was kind, intelligent, and he truly saw me. He encouraged my writing, listened to my dreams, and made me feel accepted in a way my family rarely did. My parents' disapproval of Mark was immediate and visceral. Dinners became battlegrounds. My mother would make thinly veiled insults about his lack of ambition, his unsuitable background. My father would simply retreat behind his newspaper, his silence louder than any shouting match. I remember one particularly nasty argument. It was after I'd spent a weekend camping with Mark and his friends, something utterly normal for young adults, but scandalous in my parents' eyes. When I came home, my mother was waiting, her face a mask of cold fury. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Sleeping in a tent with that boy? What will people think? You're ruining our family's reputation." I tried to explain, to defend Mark, to assert my autonomy. "I'm an adult, Mom. I'm allowed to make my own choices." Her eyes, usually warm, were now icy. "Not under my roof, you're not. Not if you're going to bring shame upon this family." The argument escalated. My father joined in, his voice booming for the first time in years. They accused me of being irresponsible, ungrateful, of throwing away everything they'd given me. They demanded I end things with Mark, focus on my studies, become the daughter they envisioned. I stood my ground. For the first time, I refused to bend. I told them that Mark made me happy, that I was finding my own way, that their constant judgment was suffocating me. The words were barely out of my mouth when my mother's face hardened, her expression utterly devoid of warmth. If you insist on choosing this path, then you've chosen to walk it alone. You can't live under our roof and disrespect our values. You need to make a choice. The air thickened with unspoken threats. I knew what she meant, and for the first time, the thought of actually being cast out, of being truly alone, felt terrifyingly real. I lay awake that night, tears silently soaking my pillow, the weight of their disapproval pressing down on me. I wanted their love desperately, but I also wanted to be myself, and it felt like those two desires were mutually exclusive. The morning after the ultimatum, the house was eerily silent. A heavy quiet hung in the air, thick with unspoken resentment and a chilling sense of dread. I went about my morning routine, each movement feeling deliberate, watched. My parents avoided my gaze at breakfast, their faces set, unyielding. It was as if I was already a ghost in my own home. I knew what I had to do, but the terror of it seized my throat. I loved Mark, and he represented a future where I could be authentically myself, unburdened by my family's expectations. But walking away from my family, from the only home I'd ever known, felt like tearing a limb from my own body. The choice had been laid bare: conform or be cast out. I remember sitting in my room, staring at the walls adorned with photos of a childhood that felt light years away. A picture of Sarah and me, grinning gap-toothed, felt like a cruel joke now. How could something so fundamental, so loving, shatter so completely? My heart ached, a deep, hollow pain that resonated with every breath. I knew with absolute certainty that if I stayed, I would lose myself entirely. I would become a shadow, living a life dictated by fear and obligation. And I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't betray myself. It was the hardest decision I'd ever faced, the most isolating realization. My voice trembled as I walked into the living room where my parents sat stiffly, waiting. The television played a muted morning show, its cheerful banality a grotesque contrast to the drama unfolding. "I've thought about what you said," I began, my voice barely a whisper, but it felt like a roar in the silent room. My mother's eyes, cold and unwavering, met mine. My father shifted in his armchair, his jaw tight. "And," my mother prompted, her tone sharp, impatient. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the inevitable pain. I can't give up on Mark, and I can't stop being who I am." The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. For a moment, there was just silence. Then my mother stood, her face pale, her lips a thin, hard line. "So you choose a boy over your family, over everything we've given you?" There was a tremor in her voice, but it was not of sadness, but of utter contempt. "It's not about choosing a boy, Mom," I pleaded, tears finally stinging my eyes. "It's about choosing myself. It's about being true to who I am." My father rose then, his presence filling the room with a cold authority. "We raised you better than this," he said, his voice low, controlled, and far more terrifying than any shout. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? With disrespect? With shame?" He walked towards me, not with anger, but with a chilling finality. "If you want to live your life so recklessly, then you can do it somewhere else. You can't stay here." The words, when they came, felt like a physical blow. "Pack your bags, get out. You are no longer welcome in this house." It wasn't an argument or a punishment. It was an eviction, a complete severing. My mother watched, her expression unreadable, her silence an affirmation of his decree. There was no appeal, no negotiation, no last plea, just the cold, hard reality of their decision. My legs felt like lead, but I turned and walked to my room. I stuffed a few essentials into my duffel bag, some clothes, a few books, a worn journal. My hands shook so violently I could barely zip the bag. As I walked back through the living room, past my silent, unmoving parents, I felt a strange combination of terror and a fragile defiance. I was being thrown out, yes, but I was also finally free to be myself. But that freedom came at an unimaginable cost. As the heavy oak door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into the bitter night, I knew my life would never be the same. The cold wasn't just in the air, it was a permanent resident in my heart. My family had rejected me, and I was utterly, terrifyingly alone.
The first few nights were a blur of shock and raw terror. The reality of homelessness hit me with a brutal force I was completely unprepared for. I didn't have Mark to turn to immediately. He was out of town visiting family, and I couldn't bring myself to burden him with my immediate crisis. My pride, what little was left of it, wouldn't allow me to tell him I had literally nowhere to go. I called a high school friend, Sarah, desperate for a place to crash, but her parents, knowing mine, quickly declined, citing family issues that they couldn't get involved in. The rejection compounded the pain. I slept in my car for a night, a battered old sedan that was barely running, parked in a deserted lot. The seats were uncomfortable, the cold seeped in through the windows, and every creak of the metal, every passing car, sent a jolt of fear through me. Sleep was impossible. My mind raced, replaying my parents' words, their cold faces, the slamming door. Shame gnawed at me. How could this be my life? Just days ago, I had a home, a family, a future, however uncertain. Now I had nothing. The next few weeks were a descent into a world I'd only ever observed from a distance, working at the homeless shelter. Now I was one of them. My small savings dwindled quickly. Food became a luxury, hot showers a distant memory. I learned to stretch a single meal over 2 days, to ignore the constant hunger pangs. I spent my days in public libraries, seeking refuge from the cold and a semblance of normalcy, pretending to study. My nights were spent in parks or tucked away in the corners of parking garages, always alert, always afraid. The loneliness was crushing. It was a silence so profound it screamed in my ears. I missed the mundane comforts of home, my bed, my books, the scent of my mother's cooking. More than that, I missed the illusion of family. Even with all the tension, there had been a structure, a safety net. Now, there was nothing. My pride began to crumble. I was too ashamed to contact Mark, to admit the full extent of my destitution. I sent vague texts saying I was busy, staying with friends. I pushed him away, convincing myself he deserved better than a homeless girlfriend. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family had rejected me, and now I was rejecting the one person who truly cared. The physical toll was immense. My clothes grew dirty and worn, my hair unkempt. The constant stress etched itself onto my face. I became invisible.
People walked past me, their eyes sliding away, afraid to make contact. I started to understand the stigma, the dehumanization that came with being homeless. It was as if my very existence was an inconvenience, a stain on the pristine fabric of society. Despair began to set in, a heavy blanket that threatened to smother me. There were days I wondered if it was worth it, if I should just give up. I felt like a failure, a burden, a worthless outcast. My identity, once tied to my family and my aspirations, was reduced to a single humiliating label: homeless. But amidst the darkness, small flickers of light began to appear. One freezing night, huddled under a thin blanket in an alleyway, an older woman, also homeless, offered me half of her meager sandwich. Her name was Maria, and her eyes held a profound sadness, but also an unwavering resilience. We talked for hours, sharing stories of how we'd ended up on the streets. She taught me practical survival skills: where to find safe places to sleep, how to get clean water, which soup kitchens offered the best meals. Maria's quiet kindness was a lifeline. She didn't judge me, she simply understood. Through her, I began to see that I wasn't alone, that there was a hidden community of people, struggling, yes, but also fiercely human, fiercely determined. She reminded me of the strength I still possessed, the resilience I hadn't realized I had. The experience of living on the streets, as horrifying as it was, also started to strip away the false pretenses I'd carried. The need for my parents' approval, the fear of their judgment, it all began to fade in the face of true survival. What did their opinion matter when I was just trying to find my next meal? This forced me to redefine my self-worth, not by what I had or what my family thought, but by my sheer will to survive, by the quiet dignity Maria showed me. It was a slow, painful process of rediscovery, learning that my worth was inherent, not conditional. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but a gradual, gritty realization forged in the unforgiving crucible of the streets.
After months on the streets, the turning point came not with a sudden miracle, but with a quiet, persistent whisper of hope. Maria, my friend and mentor from the streets, fell ill. It was a harsh reminder of our vulnerability, but it also spurred me into action. I couldn't just stand by. I started working odd jobs, cleaning storefronts, washing dishes, anything to earn enough money to help her, and in doing so, I started to help myself. It was through these small, often humiliating jobs that I began to rebuild my self-esteem. Each dollar earned was a victory, a testament to my own strength. I saved every penny, not just for Maria's medicine, but for a future I was finally daring to imagine. One afternoon, while working at a small diner, the owner, a gruff but kind man named Frank, noticed my dedication. He saw past my worn clothes and tired eyes. He offered me a full-time position, a small room above the diner, and a chance to get back on my feet. It was a hand up, not a hand out, and I seized it with every fiber of my being. That small room with its peeling paint and single window felt like a palace. It was mine, a place where I could sleep safely, take a hot shower, and finally truly breathe. Slowly, painstakingly, I started to put my life together. I contacted Mark. The conversation was agonizing. I confessed everything: the homelessness, the shame, the fear that had made me push him away. To my surprise, he didn't judge. He listened, his voice filled with a profound sadness and unwavering love. He apologized for not being there for me, for not noticing my struggle. We spent hours talking, reconnecting, rebuilding the trust I had inadvertently broken. He became my anchor, my gentle reminder of the love that existed outside the confines of my family. I continued to work, saving enough to enroll in evening classes at the community college I had once dismissed. This time, I chose subjects that truly spoke to me: sociology, psychology, and creative writing. I was learning, growing, and finally thriving. The experience of homelessness had left deep scars, but it had also forged me into someone stronger, more resilient, and more compassionate. My perspective on family had shifted dramatically. I no longer yearned for the conditional love of my parents. I realized that family wasn't just about blood, it was about connection, acceptance, and unconditional support. Mark was my chosen family. Maria, who eventually recovered and found stable housing with my help, was family. Frank, the diner owner, was family. A few years later, I had a stable job as a social worker, helping others navigate the same darkness I had walked through. I bought a small apartment, filled it with books and art, creating a home that was truly my own, built on my own terms. One day, a letter arrived. It was from Sarah, my sister. She had heard whispers through the small-town grapevine, not about my success, but about the initial struggles. She expressed regret, a tentative apology for her own silence, and a desire to talk. The thought of reconnecting with my biological family stirred up a complex mix of emotions: anger, hurt, but also a flicker of longing for what we once were. I decided to meet her. The conversation was difficult, filled with awkward silences and carefully chosen words. Sarah admitted she had always felt pressure from our parents too, and that she regretted not standing up for me. She told me our parents were older now, quieter, and had expressed a subtle, unspoken remorse, though they never directly apologized for their actions. I still haven't returned home to my parents. The wounds are deep, and while the anger has faded, replaced by a quiet understanding, the trust hasn't fully reformed. Maybe one day I will be ready to truly forgive, to fully open that door again. But the biggest lesson I learned wasn't about seeking their forgiveness. It was about finding forgiveness for myself, for not being who they wanted me to be. It was about finding redemption not in their acceptance, but in my own journey, my own survival, and my own capacity for love and resilience. My journey from homelessness wasn't just about finding a roof over my head. It was about building a home within myself. It taught me that true strength isn't found in avoiding pain, but in walking through it, emerging not unbroken, but transformed. It's about discovering that even after the deepest rejection, hope can bloom, and redemption is a path you forge for yourself, one courageous step at a time.